Chester Alan Arthur was born in the early years of the 19th century in 1829 in the small town of Fairfield, Vermont. His life, though often overshadowed by the turbulent political landscape of the time, would be one of quiet transitions and measured influence, especially during his unexpected presidency of the United States. Arthur's story unfolds within the broader context of a nation still defining itself, coming to terms with the aftermath of the Civil War, navigating the complexities of industrialization and shifting political ideologies. As a man who never sought the highest office, his ascent to the presidency in 1881 came suddenly, after the tragic assassination of President James A. Garfield. Arthur's presidency would mark a calm yet pivotal turning point in American politics. It was a time when the country was caught between the old political machines and the emerging reforms that sought to make government more transparent and efficient. Tonight, as we journey through the life of Chester A. Arthur, we will trace his early years, his rise through legal and political circles, his unexpected presidency, and his quieter years after leaving the White House. We will reflect on his contributions and challenges, offering a peaceful, steady exploration of his legacy. Before we begin, if you enjoy the journey through history, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing where you're listening from. Now, let the story unfold at its own pace as we ease into the life of Chester A. Arthur. Chester A. Arthur was born on October 5, 1829 in Fairfield, Vermont, to a family that had deep roots in the state. His father, William Arthur, was a Baptist minister who had emigrated from Ireland, seeking better opportunities in the young United States. Chester's mother, Malvina Stone, was a native of Vermont, and it was from her that Chester inherited much of his New England reserve and dignity. The family lived modestly, and their faith played a central role in shaping Chester's values during his early years. His childhood was marked by the absence of his father for much of the time. William Arthur had a vision of spreading the Baptist faith, and in the pursuit of that mission, often moved from town to town, leaving his family behind. It was during these times that young Chester, along with his siblings, was raised primarily by his mother. This early experience of independence and responsibility shaped his character, laying the foundation for the man who would eventually navigate the complex political landscape of the 19th century. Growing up in a family that valued education and religious devotion, Chester's intellectual curiosity was fostered early. The importance of self-discipline and integrity was imparted to him in these formative years. Though the family moved often, Chester found solace in books and became an avid reader. By the time he was a teenager, Chester was already a promising student, impressing his teachers with his diligence and sharp mind. Chester's academic journey began in local schools, but it wasn't long before he earned a place at Union College in Schenectady, New York, in 1849. At the age of 20, Chester left his home in Vermont, a significant step for a young man of his time. Union College, a respected institution known for its classical curriculum, became the stage for Chester to further hone his intellect. It was here that he first encountered the ideas that would shape his future political views. At Union College, Chester A. Arthur found himself in an environment where rigorous academic study was the norm. He excelled in his courses, particularly in subjects like Latin, mathematics, and rhetoric. His studies at Union provided him with the tools to think critically, to debate, and to understand the political dynamics of the world around him. Yet, despite his academic success, Chester was not particularly involved in the social life of the college. He kept to a smaller circle of friends, focused more on his studies than on the typical college activities. This early focus on self-reliance and introspection would become a hallmark of his character throughout his life. In addition to his academic achievements, Chester was noted for his polished demeanour and gentlemanly conduct. He was known for his impeccable manners, which served him well both in the classroom and in later political circles. These traits, paired with his natural intelligence, would serve him as he navigated the competitive and often contentious world of American politics. Chester's experiences at Union College not only shaped his intellect, but also laid the groundwork for the professional choices he would make in the years that followed. Upon graduating in 1853, Arthur was ready to leave the academic world behind and pursue a career in law. The legal profession at the time was seen as a prestigious and stable career, and it offered Chester the opportunity to make his mark in the growing city of New York. Upon completing his studies at Union College, Chester returned to New York City, where he began his legal training. He apprenticed under a prominent lawyer, learning the ins and outs of the legal world. Over time, Arthur became a respected figure in the legal community, known for his strong work ethic, his ability to navigate complex legal issues, and his calm, methodical approach to problem solving. These early experiences in law and his work with some of the most influential legal minds of his time would serve as the foundation for his later political career. Throughout his early years, Arthur was building a reputation as a man who valued education, integrity, and hard work. His quiet dedication to his studies and his early career marked him as a figure of promise, but it was in the political arena rather than the courtroom that Arthur would find his true calling. Arthur's education was a fundamental part of his early life, helping to shape him into the man who would one day rise to the highest office in the land. After his time in local schools in Vermont, he entered Union College in Schenectady, New York in 1849. The decision to attend Union College was a pivotal moment in Chester's life, as it marked the beginning of his deeper engagement with the intellectual and political currents of his time. Union College, at that point in history, was a respected institution known for its rigorous academic programs. Students who attended were expected to meet high academic standards, and it was here that Chester was exposed to many of the intellectual ideas that would later influence his political views. The college's curriculum was based on classical studies, which included subjects such as Latin, Greek, history, philosophy, and mathematics. These disciplines would lay the foundation for Chester's later legal career and political thinking. Chester's experience at Union College was marked by quiet diligence. He was not one to seek the spotlight or engage in the social activities that many of his peers pursued. Instead, he devoted himself to his studies with a seriousness that earned him the respect of his professors. His academic strengths were most notable in the areas of rhetoric and logic, both of which would prove to be invaluable in his later political career. Chester's ability to present a clear, reasoned argument made him an effective speaker and a formidable figure in the political landscape. Throughout his time at Union College, Chester also demonstrated his leadership potential. He was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, an academic honor society reflecting his academic excellence. However, despite his intellectual achievements, Chester was not particularly active in the college's social life. He was more focused on his personal growth and intellectual development, traits that would serve him well in the years to come. Chester's interest in law began during his time at Union College, though his ambition to become a lawyer was not fully realized until after graduation. The exposure to classical literature and the study of philosophy instilled in him a sense of justice and an interest in the complexities of human society. These interests would eventually lead him to the legal profession, where he saw an opportunity to contribute to the growing nation and to make a name for himself. After completing his studies at Union College in 1853, Chester decided to pursue a career in law. He moved to New York City, where he began studying under the tutelage of an established lawyer. During this time, Chester learned the intricacies of the law, absorbing its principles and developing a deep understanding of legal matters. The law, at that time, was a highly respected profession, and Chester's decision to enter the field was seen as a promising choice for a man of his intellect and abilities. Chester's legal training was rigorous, and it provided him with the skills necessary to navigate the complex legal system. He eventually passed the bar exam and opened a law practice in New York City, where he quickly gained a reputation as a competent and dedicated attorney. His success in the legal field was built on his calm demeanor, meticulous attention to detail, and strong sense of justice, traits that would become hallmarks of his character throughout his life. While Chester was building his career in law, he also began to develop an interest in politics. The political landscape of the 19th century was one of great change as the nation grappled with the aftermath of the Civil War, the expansion of the railroad and the growth of industry. These changes would shape the future of the country, and Chester, ever attentive to the political developments of his time, found himself drawn to the Republican Party. In 1858, Chester became involved in politics when he was appointed as a public advocate for the Republican Party in New York. This was a significant step for a man who had previously been more focused on his legal work than on political ambitions. His work in politics at the local level allowed him to develop a deep understanding of the political system and gave him the connections he would need as his career progressed. Over the next few years, Chester's involvement in political circles grew, and he became more familiar with the workings of New York's political machine. Chester A. Arthur's time at Union College and his subsequent legal career were formative in shaping him into the man who would become president. His education, though not particularly flashy, was marked by a deep intellectual curiosity and a commitment to hard work. His experiences in law and politics prepared him for the challenges that lay ahead, and his quiet but steady progress in these fields would soon bring him into the center of American politics. His early years, marked by an unwavering sense of duty and a steady pursuit of his goals, would become the foundation for his eventual rise to the presidency. Following his graduation from Union College in 1853, Chester A. Arthur began his journey into the legal profession, a path that would set the stage for his later political career. Moving to New York City, Arthur sought to make his mark in one of the most competitive legal environments in the country. His ambition to become a respected lawyer was not fueled by a desire for fame or fortune, but rather by a deep belief in the principles of justice and fairness, values he had cultivated during his academic years and in his family upbringing. In New York, Arthur initially worked as an apprentice to a prominent attorney. He spent several years learning the intricacies of the law, absorbing its complexities, and developing the skills needed to represent clients effectively. His dedication to his work, combined with his natural intellect, soon made him stand out in the legal community. Arthur's ability to navigate the nuanced world of law was not merely based on legal knowledge, but also on his calm, methodical approach to problem-solving. His careful attention to detail and his respectful manner made him a reliable and steady figure in the courtroom. By 1856, Arthur had passed the bar and was fully established as a lawyer in New York. His practice, though not initially large, began to grow steadily. He handled a variety of cases, but his work as a civil litigator became particularly well regarded. During this time, Chester also became known for his work in corporate law, particularly in cases involving the railroad industry. The growth of the railroads during the 19th century was a defining characteristic of America's industrial expansion, and Arthur's involvement in legal matters related to the railroads provided him with valuable experience and connections. Arthur's legal career flourished during the years leading up to the Civil War, and by the time the war broke out in 1861, he had earned a reputation as a competent and reliable lawyer. But as the nation was thrust into conflict, Chester's career took a significant turn. Though he'd built a stable and promising legal practice, he decided to take a leave of absence from his work to serve in the Union Army. This decision, while somewhat unexpected, was consistent with his sense of duty and responsibility, which had always been a defining characteristic of his life. In 1863, Chester A. Arthur was appointed as the Quartermaster General for the New York State Volunteers during the Civil War. In this role, he was responsible for the logistical coordination of the Union Army's supplies, transportation, and other support services. It was a crucial position, one that required both organizational skill and leadership. While Arthur was not directly involved in combat, his work in ensuring that the army was properly equipped and supplied played a vital role in supporting the Union's military efforts. During his time in the military, Arthur demonstrated the same calm, methodical approach that had defined his legal career. He proved himself to be highly effective in his role as Quartermaster General, managing the supply chain with efficiency and discipline. His ability to oversee complex operations and ensure that supplies were distributed to the right places at the right time earned him the respect of his superiors and peers. Though his contributions were more behind the scenes, his work in support of the Union Army was deeply appreciated. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Chester Arthur returned to New York and resumed his law practice. The end of the war brought significant changes to the country, and Arthur's legal career would evolve as the country moved from wartime to peacetime. The railroad industry, which had been crucial during the war, continued to expand, and Arthur's expertise in corporate law made him an increasingly valuable figure in legal circles. However, as the years went on, Arthur found himself drawn more into the political sphere. It was in the post-war years that Arthur's legal career and political ambitions began to intersect. In the years following the war, Arthur became increasingly involved in New York state politics. His legal background and his ability to navigate complex issues made him a sought-after figure in the political world. In particular, he became closely associated with the Republican Party's stalwart faction, which was focused on maintaining the patronage system that had developed during the post-Civil War years. This connection would prove to be crucial in Arthur's eventual rise to higher political office. In 1871, Arthur was appointed as the collector of the Port of New York, a powerful political position. This appointment was influenced by his connections within the political machine, and it marked a turning point in his career. As collector, Arthur oversaw the operations at the port, one of the busiest and most important in the country. The position gave him considerable influence, and it was here that he would begin to make his mark as a political figure. His management of the port, while not without controversy, helped to solidify his reputation as an effective administrator. Though Arthur's political career was just beginning to take shape, his legal expertise continued to serve him well. His work as a lawyer, particularly in handling corporate cases, allowed him to build the relationships and reputation needed to navigate the increasingly complex world of 19th century American politics. By the time he was appointed collector of the Port of New York, Chester A. Arthur had established himself as both a competent lawyer and a rising political figure. The foundations for his future success were now firmly in place, and his journey toward the White House was beginning to take form. Chester A. Arthur's decision to serve during the Civil War is often remembered as a pivotal moment in his life. Though he had already established himself as a competent lawyer in New York, his sense of duty to the Union led him to step away from his growing legal career to take a significant role in the war effort. This decision was in keeping with the values of responsibility and service that had shaped his upbringing and early professional life. In 1861, as the nation plunged into conflict, Arthur answered the call of duty, taking on a crucial logistical role in support of the Union Army. At the start of the war, Arthur was appointed as the Quartermaster General for the New York State Volunteers. The role was vital for the Union's military strategy, as it involved overseeing the distribution of supplies, managing transportation, and ensuring that soldiers were properly equipped. Unlike the combatants on the front lines, Arthur's work was less visible, but no less important. His responsibilities required organizational skill, efficiency, and an ability to work under pressure, qualities that Arthur had already demonstrated in his legal practice and would continue to use as he navigated the complexities of wartime. Logistics. Arthur's position as Quartermaster General placed him at the heart of the Union's efforts to supply its soldiers with the materials they needed to fight the Confederacy. He was tasked with making sure that the army had access to everything from food and clothing to weapons and ammunition. This was no small feat, as the scale of the war required a massive and constantly shifting supply chain. Arthur worked tirelessly to ensure that supplies reached the right places at the right times, and his management of the process earned him praise from his superiors. What distinguished Arthur from many of his peers was his ability to manage complex logistical challenges with a calm and steady hand. His quiet, methodical approach made him a reliable figure in a time of great upheaval. He was known for his efficiency in organizing the transportation of goods and for his ability to keep the flow of supplies moving smoothly. even in the face of significant challenges. Whether it was coordinating the delivery of food to soldiers or ensuring that medical supplies were available during critical battles, Arthur's work was essential to the success of the Union Army. While Arthur's military role was largely behind the scenes, it was a significant chapter in his life. His service helped to shape his understanding of leadership, organisation, and the importance of strategic thinking. Though he was not directly involved in combat, his efforts were crucial to supporting the soldiers who fought on the front lines. This period of his life also further ingrained in him a sense of duty to the nation, a value that would remain central to his character throughout his career. Arthur's time during the Civil War also contributed to his growing reputation as a man of discipline and integrity. His role in managing supplies and overseeing the logistics of the war effort was a demanding one, and Arthur rose to the occasion with the same quiet professionalism that he had displayed in his legal career. His work during the war not only served the Union but also solidified his place in the larger political machinery that would later propel him to the presidency. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Arthur returned to New York, where he resumed his legal practice. The years he spent serving the Union Army were a transformative experience, both personally and professionally. The skills he developed in managing large-scale operations would prove useful in his later political career, particularly as he began to navigate the complex landscape of New York politics. Arthur's military service also played a crucial role in shaping his political affiliations. The war had left the country divided, and the political climate was changing rapidly. In New York, political factions were forming, and Arthur found himself aligned with the Stalwarts, a faction of the Republican Party that was committed to maintaining the patronage system. This connection would have a lasting impact on his future, as it eventually led to his appointment as Collector of the Port of New York, a position that would further elevate his profile in political circles. The experience of the Civil War, though not one of active combat for Arthur, marked a defining moment in his life. His role in supporting the Union Army, though often overlooked, was critical to the war effort. It helped to shape his character, strengthened his leadership abilities, and provided him with the experience that would later serve him in his political career. Chester A. Arthur's service during the Civil War stands as a testament to his quiet dedication to duty, his commitment to the Union cause, and his ability to manage complex challenges under pressure. His contributions, though not always in the spotlight, were vital to the success of the Union's military strategy. As he moved forward in his career, the lessons learned during this period would continue to guide him, and his sense of responsibility to the nation would remain a central part of his character. Following the conclusion of the Civil War, Chester A. Arthur returned to his legal practice in New York City, resuming his role as a respected attorney after his time in the Union Army. The post-war period in the United States was one of dramatic change, politically, economically, and socially. The country was still recovering from the scars of war, while industrialization, the expansion of railroads, and the emergence of a new political climate reshaped the nation. Although Arthur had already established himself as a capable and reliable lawyer, the political landscape was rapidly evolving, and he soon found himself drawn to the world of politics. His career as a lawyer, especially his work with the railroad industry, opened many doors for him in political circles. It was a time when patronage, the distribution of government jobs and favours in exchange for political support, was a powerful force, and Arthur, through his connections, found himself becoming increasingly involved with the Republican Party's stalwart faction. The stalwarts, who were aligned with the political machine of New York's Republican Party, were in favour of maintaining the patronage system, which had allowed political leaders to control vast networks of appointments and favours. This faction's power was immense, and Chester, with his background in law and his understanding of the political system, quickly found himself in the thick of things. His ability to work within the existing political structure made him a key player in the stalwart movement. In 1871, Arthur's political career took a significant turn when he was appointed Collector of the Port of New York. a powerful and influential position. As the collector, Arthur was responsible for overseeing the customs duties at one of the busiest ports in the country. The position provided him with a great deal of influence, and it was here that he would begin to build a reputation as an effective and efficient administrator. The port was crucial to the United States economy, and Arthur's ability to manage its operations helped him gain the trust and respect of political leaders and businessmen alike. Arthur's tenure as collector was not without controversy, as the patronage system played a prominent role in the way he carried out his duties. Critics often pointed to his close ties with the political machine, and his involvement in securing government jobs for political allies. However, Arthur's supporters argued that he was simply doing what was necessary to maintain the political balance and ensure the smooth functioning of the government. His management of the port was effective, and he earned a reputation for being an able administrator who understood the importance of keeping the system running smoothly. Despite his association with the stalwart faction and its patronage system, Chester A. Arthur was known for his integrity and professionalism. He was a man who took his responsibilities seriously and carried out his duties with diligence and care. His work at the port, while often criticised for its political connections, helped to solidify his standing as a rising figure in New York politics. It was also during this time that Arthur began to make connections with some of the most influential figures in the Republican Party, including those who would later support his presidential aspirations. The political climate of the 1870s and 1880s was one of considerable flux. The country was transitioning from a post-Civil War period into an era marked by industrial growth, increasing immigration, and the development of new political ideologies. The stalwarts, with their firm grip on patronage and their belief in the power of political machines, were one of the dominant forces in the Republican Party. However, the reform-minded half-breeds, who advocated for civil service reform and a more merit-based approach to government, were also gaining influence. This tension between the two factions would eventually play a pivotal role in Arthur's own political rise. Arthur's political career took another significant step in 1880, when he became the vice presidential candidate on the Republican ticket, alongside James A. Garfield. The nomination was, in many ways, a compromise between the stalwarts and the half-breeds. Arthur, with his strong connections within the stalwart faction, was seen as a man who could unify the party and secure the support of the political machine. Though he had little desire to run for vice president, his nomination marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. At the time of the 1880 Republican National Convention, Arthur was not particularly interested in seeking the vice presidency. However, the convention's decision to nominate him was seen as a political maneuver designed to appease the stalwarts, who were concerned about the growing influence of the reform-minded half-breeds. Arthur's nomination was an example of the political manoeuvring that was so characteristic of the time, and he accepted the position with characteristic calm and reserve. The election of 1880 was a contentious one, and Arthur's role in the campaign was relatively low-key. Garfield, the presidential candidate, was the focus of the campaign, while Arthur's presence on the ticket was seen as a strategic move to shore up support among the stalwarts. In the end, Garfield won the election, and Arthur became Vice President of the United States. Arthur's rise to the vice presidency was a turning point in his career. It was an unexpected development, but one that would soon propel him to the highest office in the land. While he had not sought the position, Arthur was now in a position of great power. His time as vice president would be brief, but it would set the stage for the events that would unfold in the following year. Chester A. Arthur's rise through the political ranks was characterized by his quiet, steady approach to leadership and his ability to navigate the complex network of alliances and rivalries within the Republican Party. Although he was not an outspoken or flamboyant figure, Arthur's political acumen and ability to build relationships with influential figures allowed him to gain significant influence within the party. After his time as collector of the Port of New York, Arthur became more deeply entrenched in the inner workings of New York's political machine, a system that was dominated by the stalwarts, the faction of the Republican Party that favoured patronage. and political favouritism. The stalwarts were led by powerful figures such as Roscoe Conkling, a US senator from New York, and together they formed a formidable political force. Arthur, with his connections and experience, quickly became one of their key supporters. Though Arthur was primarily associated with the stalwarts, he also maintained a reputation for competence and reliability, which made him attractive to other factions within the party. His ability to remain calm and level-headed, even in the most heated political environments, made him a trusted figure. His reputation as a man of integrity, who could be relied upon to carry out tasks efficiently, allowed him to cultivate strong relationships with both allies and rivals. Arthur's rise in the political ranks was not without controversy, particularly due to his association with the patronage system. The system, which had long been a part of American politics, allowed politicians to distribute government jobs and favours in exchange for political support. Critics of the system argued that it promoted corruption and inefficiency, while proponents, like the stalwarts, believed it was necessary for maintaining party loyalty and power. Arthur, while not a radical reformer, managed to work within this system, and his success in securing political appointments helped solidify his position within the Republican Party. As Arthur's influence grew, so did his involvement in the Republican Party's internal struggles. The factionalism that existed within the party was a significant challenge, and Arthur was often at the centre of it. On one side were the stalwarts, who were committed to maintaining the patronage system and the status quo, while on the other side were the half-breeds, who sought civil service reform and a more merit-based system of government. The struggle between these two factions would ultimately lead to the conflict that would define Arthur's political career. In 1880, the Republican Party faced a major test when it held its national convention to select a candidate for the presidency. The party was deeply divided between the stalwarts and the reform-minded half-breeds, and it was in this context that Arthur's role became increasingly important. Though Arthur himself was not a candidate for president, his support for the stalwart faction and his connections with powerful figures like Senator Conkling gave him significant influence over the outcome of the convention. The convention ultimately nominated James A. Garfield, a respected Republican leader who was considered a moderate and somewhat neutral figure. However, Garfield's nomination was seen as a compromise between the two factions, and it left both the stalwarts and half-breeds dissatisfied. To balance the ticket, Arthur was chosen as the vice-presidential nominee. The selection of Arthur was a strategic move designed to unite the party and to appeal to the stalwarts, who had grown disillusioned with Garfield's moderate stance. Arthur's nomination as vice president was somewhat unexpected, as he had not actively sought the position. However, it marked a crucial turning point in his political career. As vice president, Arthur would gain access to the highest levels of government, placing him in a position to influence the direction of the country. Although his role as vice president was largely ceremonial, it was clear that Arthur's quiet yet effective political strategies had positioned him as a key figure in the Republican Party. The election of 1880 was contentious, and the outcome was uncertain until the very end. In the end, Garfield won the presidency, and Arthur assumed the vice presidency. The election results were a testament to the divisions within the Republican Party, but they also highlighted the strategic importance of Arthur's role. As vice president, Arthur was able to maintain a calm, steady presence in the administration, and his ability to navigate the complexities of party politics would serve him well when the unexpected occurred. In July 1881, just 6 months into Garfield's presidency, the unthinkable happened. President Garfield was shot by an assassin. This tragic event thrust Chester A. Arthur into the presidency, a position he had not actively sought but now found himself occupying. While the country mourned the loss of Garfield, Arthur's political career would take a sudden and unexpected turn. With the nation in a state of shock, Arthur was called upon to step into the role of president and lead the country through this difficult time. Chester A. Arthur's appointment as the collector of the Port of New York in 1871 marked a key moment in his political career. one that would provide him with invaluable experience in managing a vast, complex system, and would help solidify his influence within the Republican Party. The position of collector was one of the most powerful in the federal government at the time, and it played a critical role in the economic life of the country. New York's port was a bustling hub for international trade, making the job one of both prestige and importance. The collector's office was responsible for overseeing customs duties, regulating shipping, and ensuring that goods coming into the United States were properly inspected and taxed. The job required an individual with strong administrative skills, an understanding of commerce and trade, and the ability to manage a significant workforce. Arthur's selection to this position was not an accident. It was a reflection of his rising prominence within New York's political machine, particularly within the stalwart faction of the Republican Party, which was firmly entrenched in the city's politics. In accepting the position, Arthur was stepping into a role that was both politically charged and crucial to the country's economic infrastructure. The office was notorious for being a centre of patronage, where political appointments and favours were exchanged in return for loyalty and support. While this system was heavily criticised by reformers, it was also deeply ingrained in the political culture of the time. For Arthur, the appointment to the collector's office was an opportunity to demonstrate his organisational skills, and it was here that his political influence began to take root more firmly. Arthur's management of the Port of New York was marked by efficiency and orderliness. Despite the patronage nature of the position, he did not indulge in the rampant corruption that was often associated with it. He focused instead on the logistical aspects of the job, overseeing the collection of customs duties, managing the workforce, and ensuring that the port ran smoothly. His leadership was characterized by a calm, steady hand that was capable of balancing the political realities of the time with the practical demands of running a vital government office. Under Arthur's watch, the port functioned effectively, and his administration of the office was considered competent by both his supporters and critics. While his association with the stalwarts and the patronage system drew criticism, it was clear that Arthur was a man who took his responsibilities seriously and carried out his duties with professionalism. He was able to navigate the complexities of the office with a quiet determination, earning the respect of both his colleagues and those in the political machine. However, Arthur's tenure as collector was not without controversy. The position, by its very nature, was rife with political manoeuvring, and Arthur's association with the stalwarts meant that he was often at odds with reformers who sought to end the system of patronage. One of the key criticisms of the office was the way that political appointments were made, often without regard for merit or qualifications. Reformers argued that the system led to inefficiency and corruption, while those within the political machine saw it as a necessary means of ensuring political loyalty. Arthur's ability to navigate this tension, managing the expectations of both his political allies and his detractors, was a hallmark of his time in office. Though he was a product of the patronage system, he also demonstrated a level of administrative skill and competence that allowed him to maintain control of the office without falling into the same level of corruption that had plagued his predecessors. His leadership at the Port of New York established him as a man who could be relied upon to manage complex systems and keep them running smoothly, even in the face of political pressure. In many ways, the experience Arthur gained at the Port of New York was a critical one for his future in national politics. The job allowed him to build important relationships within the Republican Party, particularly with other stalwarts who would later support him in his presidential bid. It also gave him the administrative experience that would prove valuable when he assumed the presidency. The skills he developed in managing the port's operations, particularly his ability to balance political realities with practical demands, would serve him well as he moved through the ranks of government. The political influence Arthur gained through his appointment as collector was not without its drawbacks. His association with the stalwart faction and his role in maintaining the patronage system made him a target for reformers who sought to clean up the government. The tension between the stalwarts and the reformers, particularly the half-breeds, would come to a head in the 1880s, and it was this internal struggle within the Republican Party that would play a pivotal role in Arthur's rise to the presidency. Despite the criticisms, Arthur's tenure at the Port of New York helped to establish his reputation as a capable, if politically connected administrator. His calm, methodical approach to his work, combined with his political connections, made him a figure of influence in New York politics. His work in this position not only helped to shape his political career, but also prepared him for the challenges he would face when, in an unexpected twist of fate, he was thrust into the presidency following the assassination of James A. Garfield. Chester A. Arthur's association with the political machine of New York, particularly the stalwart faction of the Republican Party, was a defining feature of his early political career. The political machine, a system rooted in patronage, played a significant role in shaping the landscape of 19th century American politics. Patronage, the practice of awarding government jobs and favours in exchange for political loyalty, was deeply entrenched in both local and national politics. For Arthur, this system was not only a way to gain influence, but also a tool that would help him navigate the complexities of political life in the rapidly changing world of post-Civil War America. The Stalwarts, the faction with which Arthur was aligned, were staunch supporters of the patronage system. Led by powerful figures like Senator Roscoe Conkling, the Stalwarts represented a conservative wing of the Republican Party that was committed to maintaining the existing political structure. They viewed patronage as a necessary means of rewarding party loyalty and ensuring the party's dominance in government. For Arthur, the Stalwarts provided the political backing that would propel him to higher office, including his eventual appointment as the collector of the Port of New York. Patronage was not without its critics, however. Reformers, including the half-breeds within the Republican Party, sought to reduce the influence of the political machine and establish a more merit-based system for appointing government officials. These reformers argued that the patronage system encouraged corruption, inefficiency and favoritism, and they pushed for civil service reform to ensure that government positions were filled based on qualifications rather than political connections. The growing tension between the Stalwarts and the Reformers would set the stage for the conflicts that would shape Arthur's path to the presidency. During his time as the collector of the Port of New York, Arthur was closely associated with the patronage system. The position, with its considerable power and influence, allowed him to dispense government jobs and favours to political allies. This made Arthur a key figure in New York's political machine, as he was in a position to reward loyal supporters and maintain the stalwart faction's grip on power. While his administrative skills were highly regarded, his role in patronage made him a controversial figure, particularly among reformers who sought to dismantle the system. Arthur's involvement in the patronage system was not without its complexities. While he was a product of the machine, he also recognized the importance of reform. He understood the need to balance the demands of his political allies with the growing pressure for change from the reformist wings of the party. This delicate balancing act would become a hallmark of his political career, and it would be tested when he ascended to the presidency after the assassination of James A. Garfield. The patronage system that Arthur was deeply embedded in had significant consequences for the functioning of the federal government. Critics of the system argued that it led to the appointment of unqualified individuals to important positions simply because they were loyal to the party. These appointments often resulted in inefficiency and corruption within government agencies, undermining public trust in the political system. Reformers sought to address these issues by advocating for a merit-based civil service, in which government employees would be selected based on their qualifications and abilities rather than their political connections. The stalwarts, including Arthur, were firmly opposed to civil service reform, as it threatened their political power and control over patronage. However, as the political landscape shifted, the pressure for reform grew. The assassination of President Garfield in 1881, carried out by a disgruntled office seeker who'd been denied a government job, was a tragic turning point in the debate over patronage. Garfield's death highlighted the dangers of the patronage system and the need for reform. In the wake of the assassination, There was a renewed push for civil service reform, and Arthur, now president, would have to navigate the political pressure to embrace change. Arthur's relationship with patronage and the political machine would become a defining aspect of his presidency. Though he'd long been a staunch supporter of the system, he would be forced to reconcile his past with the demands of a nation eager for reform. His ability to adapt to this new reality would shape his legacy as president. In the end, Chester A., Arthur's association with the political machine and the patronage system was both a strength and a weakness. On one hand, it provided him with the political support he needed to rise to the presidency. On the other hand, it made him a target for reformers who sought to eliminate the very system that had helped elevate him. The tension between these competing forces would come to a head during his time in office, and it would ultimately determine the course of his presidency. In 1881, Chester A., Arthur found himself at the centre of a major political shift when he was selected as the Republican vice presidential nominee, alongside James A. Garfield. Arthur's nomination was a strategic move designed to placate the stalwart faction of the Republican Party, which had become disillusioned with Garfield's more moderate views. Though Arthur had a little interest in the vice presidency, his political ties and loyalty to the stalwarts made him a suitable choice to balance the ticket. The election of 1880 was marked by division within the Republican Party, and Arthur's role in the campaign was largely seen as a way to secure the support of the more conservative elements within the party. Garfield won the presidency in a hard-fought contest, but his time in office would be tragically short. Just months after taking office, Garfield was shot by an assassin, Charles J. Guiteau, in July 1881. The president's death thrust Arthur into the presidency, an office he'd not actively sought but now found himself occupying in the wake of this national tragedy. At the time of Garfield's assassination, Arthur's political career had been largely defined by his association with the stalwarts and his role as a supporter of the patronage system. Many were uncertain about what kind of president Arthur would be, given his past political affiliations. His reputation as a man who was loyal to the political machine, combined with his relatively low profile as vice president, left many questioning his ability to lead the nation. The moment Arthur ascended to the presidency, the country was in a state of mourning. Garfield's death had shocked the nation, and the political landscape was in turmoil. The public was uncertain about the direction the country would take, especially with a man like Arthur, who was closely aligned with the old political machine, now in the highest office in the land. The nation was at a crossroads, and Arthur's leadership would be tested in ways that he had never anticipated. Despite the uncertainty surrounding his ascension, Arthur quickly took action to stabilize the country. In the first months of his presidency, he focused on assuring the American people that he would uphold Garfield's vision for a unified and prosperous nation. He made efforts to calm political tensions and ensure a smooth transition of power, demonstrating a quiet strength that was characteristic of his leadership style. Arthur's approach to governance was methodical and measured. He made it clear that he intended to govern in a manner that was consistent with the principles of law and order. While his early actions did not drastically depart from the policies of his predecessor, he showed a willingness to listen to the concerns of both political factions within the Republican Party. This was evident in his efforts to navigate the ongoing tension between the stalwarts and the reform-minded half-breeds, a divide that had deepened during Garfield's presidency. One of the most significant challenges Arthur faced as president was the growing pressure for civil service reform. The assassination of President Garfield had highlighted the dangers of the patronage system, and public sentiment was shifting toward the idea that government positions should be based on merit rather than political connections. Reformers in the Republican Party, led by figures like Senator George H. Pendleton, pushed for a new system of civil service appointments that would reduce corruption and inefficiency in government. Arthur, who had long been a supporter of the patronage system, found himself in a difficult position. He had built his political career within the machine and had benefited from the system of patronage. However, as president, he recognized the need for change. Despite his past associations, Arthur gradually came to see that the old system was no longer viable in the rapidly modernizing United States. In 1883, Arthur took a significant step towards civil service reform with the passage of the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. The act, named after its primary sponsor, Senator Pendleton, established a merit-based system for federal employment. Under the new law, government jobs would be filled based on qualifications rather than political loyalty, and civil servants would be protected from arbitrary dismissal. The Pendleton Act was a landmark piece of legislation, and Arthur's support for it marked a turning point in his presidency. The passage of the Pendleton Act was not without controversy. The stalwarts, who had long relied on the patronage system, were unhappy with the reforms, while reformers criticised the law for not going far enough. Nevertheless, Arthur's decision to support the measure was a significant political risk, one that ultimately solidified his reputation as a man capable of rising above party lines and acting in the best interests of the nation. Arthur's support for civil service reform was a defining moment in his presidency. It demonstrated that despite his past political affiliations, he was willing to adapt to the changing times and embrace reforms that were necessary for the country's progress. His leadership during this period helped to pave the way for further reforms in the years that followed, and his commitment to good governance and public service left a lasting impact on American politics. In the aftermath of Garfield's assassination, Chester A. Arthur proved that he was more than just a political pawn of the machine. His presidency, though brief, was marked by a steady hand and a willingness to embrace change. Arthur's actions during his time in office helped to shape the direction of the country and laid the groundwork for the reforms that would continue to transform American government in the decades to come. The year 1881 began like any other, with James A. Garfield, the newly elected president, beginning his term in office. Garfield had come to power with a vision for national unity and reform, but his presidency would be tragically short. On July 2, 1881, President Garfield was shot by an assassin named Charles J. Guiteau, a disgruntled office seeker who'd been denied a patronage job in the government. The shooting took place in a train station in Washington, D.C., sending shockwaves throughout the country. Garfield's death would come to define Chester A. Arthur's presidency, as it was only through this tragedy that Arthur ascended to the highest office in the land. At the time of the assassination, Arthur was the vice president, a position he had not actively sought, but had been given as a compromise to unite the factions of the Republican Party, especially the stalwarts, with whom he was closely aligned. Arthur's nomination for vice president was a political maneuver, but little did he know that just months after the election, he would be called to lead the country. The news of Garfield's shooting spread quickly, and the nation was thrown into turmoil. For several weeks, Garfield fought for his life, but the bullet wounds were severe, and the medical treatment at the time was insufficient. In the midst of this national crisis, Arthur, the new vice president, was thrust into an unfamiliar and uncomfortable position. The quiet, reserved man who'd been content in the background of the political scene now found himself at the centre of a national tragedy. During Garfield's prolonged battle for life, Arthur was faced with the difficult challenge of preparing for the possibility of becoming president. While the nation awaited news of Garfield's condition, there were many in political circles who doubted Arthur's ability to step into the role of president. His association with the stalwart faction and the political machine made many unsure of his capacity for leadership. Would he be able to rise to the occasion, or would his presidency be one defined by political manoeuvring and patronage? Garfield, despite his injuries, continued to fight for his life, and it was unclear for some time whether Arthur would be called upon to assume the presidency. However, on September 19th, 1881, after 2 months of suffering, Garfield passed away. The nation was deeply shocked, and the political landscape was forever changed. Garfield's death not only marked the end of a promising presidency, but also signalled the beginning of a new chapter in American history, one that would see Arthur, an unexpected figure, step into the White House. When Arthur learned of Garfield's death, he was in New York, and the news immediately set in motion the process of his assumption of the presidency. In the wake of the assassination, there was an outpouring of public grief, and the nation mourned the loss of a president who had been cut down in the prime of his life. But while Garfield's death was mourned, it also created a moment of uncertainty, as the country now had to adjust to the idea of a new leader. Despite his doubts and reservations about his own qualifications, Arthur stepped into the presidency with a calm demeanour. It was clear that he had inherited a divided nation, one that was not only reeling from the loss of its leader, but also struggling with the political conflicts of the time. The tension between the stalwarts and the half-breeds, the two factions of the Republican Party, had created a volatile political environment, and Arthur's leadership would be tested by this deep divide. Arthur's assumption of the presidency was a moment of national significance, but it was also a personal challenge for him. He had never expected to become president, and he had little experience in governing at the highest level. Yet, as he assumed the responsibilities of the office, Arthur displayed a quiet strength and an ability to adapt to the moment. Despite his previous association with the political machine, he understood the gravity of his position and the need to bring stability to a country in mourning. The assassination of President Garfield and the subsequent elevation of Chester A. Arthur to the presidency would become a defining moment in American history. It was a moment of deep sadness, but it also marked a shift in the country's political landscape. Arthur's unexpected rise to the presidency was, in many ways, a symbol of the unpredictability of American politics. The country had been thrown into turmoil, but Arthur, with his calm and measured approach, was able to guide the nation through this period of uncertainty. As the nation mourned the loss of Garfield, Arthur began the work of transitioning into his new role as president. The world was watching, and the expectations placed on him were high. The country needed a leader who could navigate the complexities of the time, someone who could rise above political divisions and guide the nation forward. Arthur, though uncertain of his own abilities, was now tasked with this monumental responsibility. And though the circumstances of his presidency were tragic, Chester A. Arthur would soon prove himself capable of leading the nation through this turbulent period. Chester A. Arthur's sudden ascension to the presidency after the assassination of President Garfield was met with a mixture of uncertainty and anticipation. Arthur was a man who had long been associated with the political machine of New York and the patronage system, a system that many reformers had grown to despise. His political career, marked by his rise through the stalwart faction of the Republican Party, had positioned him as a figure loyal to the old political order. But now, as president, he was confronted with the need to adapt to a new reality, one in which the public was demanding reforms and a more transparent government. In the immediate aftermath of Garfield's death, Arthur understood the weight of the moment. The country was in mourning, and the loss of Garfield had created a political vacuum. Arthur, who had spent much of his career in the background, now found himself thrust into the spotlight. He was not only responsible for leading a grieving nation, but also for managing the political tensions that had characterized Garfield's presidency. His ability to navigate this delicate situation would define the early years of his time in office. One of the first challenges Arthur faced as president was managing the fractured Republican Party. The party had been deeply divided between the stalwarts, who favoured the continuation of the patronage system, and the half-breeds, who advocated for civil service reform. Garfield, a moderate, had tried to reconcile these factions, but his assassination had only deepened the divisions. Now Arthur, with his connections to the stalwarts, had to find a way to bridge the gap and bring unity to a party that was at odds with itself. In his early days as president, Arthur took a cautious approach. He understood the significance of his actions and was careful not to alienate either faction within the Republican Party. Despite his past allegiance to the stalwarts, Arthur was keenly aware that the country was calling for change. His presidency had the potential to define the future of the Republican Party and the direction of American politics. He needed to balance the expectations of his political allies with the demands of the reformers who were pushing for a more merit-based approach to government. Arthur's early decisions as president were characterized by his cautious and methodical approach to governance. He made efforts to reach out to the reformers within his party and to demonstrate his willingness to move away from the patronage system that had defined his career. While he did not immediately abandon patronage, he made it clear that he was open to reform. His careful handling of the political situation in the early months of his presidency allowed him to gain the respect of both his allies and his critics. One of the first significant actions Arthur took as president was the appointment of a new cabinet. He made several key appointments, including naming a new Secretary of State, a new Secretary of War, and a new Secretary of the Treasury. These appointments were strategic, aimed at bringing together a team of individuals who could help navigate the political challenges ahead. Arthur understood that he needed to surround himself with capable advisors who could help him steer the country through the turbulent period that followed Garfield's death. Though his early actions were measured and cautious, Arthur's presidency soon took a more assertive turn. The issue of civil service reform, which had been a major point of contention during Garfield's presidency, became one of the central issues of Arthur's time in office. The assassination of Garfield had brought the flaws of the patronage system into sharp focus, and public opinion was shifting in favour of reform. Arthur, who had long been a supporter of patronage, found himself under pressure to address the growing calls for change. In 1883, after months of deliberation, Arthur signed into law the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. This landmark piece of legislation established a merit-based system for hiring and promoting federal employees, reducing the influence of patronage in government appointments. The Pendleton Act was a significant achievement for Arthur and a defining moment in his presidency. It marked a departure from the political machine politics that had been central to his career and demonstrated his ability to adapt to the demands of the time. The passage of the Pendleton Act was not without controversy. The stalwarts, who had long relied on the patronage system, were disappointed by Arthur's support for the reform, and many of his political allies saw it as a betrayal of the system that had helped elevate him to the presidency. However, Arthur's decision to support the reform demonstrated his growing awareness of the need for change and his willingness to act in the best interest of the country, even if it meant alienating some of his allies. Arthur's transition from a figure of the political machine to a reform-oriented president was a slow and often difficult process. However, the Pendleton Act was a critical moment in his presidency, and it helped to reshape his legacy as a president who was willing to make difficult decisions in the face of public demand for reform. The passage of the Pendleton Act not only addressed the issue of civil service reform, but also set a precedent for future reforms in American government. As Arthur continued to navigate the complexities of his presidency, he demonstrated a quiet strength and a steady hand. His ability to adapt to the changing political landscape and his commitment to reform helped to shape his legacy as a president who, despite his association with the political machine, ultimately worked to modernize and strengthen the federal government. Upon taking office after the tragic death of President Garfield, Chester A. Arthur faced the formidable challenge of guiding the nation through a period of deep political division and national mourning. The American public, shocked by Garfield's assassination, looked to Arthur not only to lead the country, but also to heal the wounds caused by the political factions that had come to a head during Garfield's presidency. Arthur, often seen as a man loyal to the stalwarts and the patronage system, now had to show that he could transcend these affiliations and govern effectively in a new era of political change. One of Arthur's first and most significant actions as president was to address the immediate aftermath of Garfield's death. His primary focus was to stabilize the government and ensure a smooth transition. Though he had not sought the presidency, Arthur understood the gravity of his new role and was determined to reassure the American people that their government would continue to function without disruption. Despite his early association with the political machine and patronage, Arthur showed a quiet confidence in his early days as president. He made it clear that he intended to carry out Garfield's vision for the country, but he also recognized that the demands of his office required him to adapt to the changing political climate. Arthur's first steps were focused on restoring a sense of stability to the nation's governance, and he made it a priority to keep the government running smoothly during a time of national crisis. Arthur's decision to fill key cabinet positions quickly was a sign of his commitment to moving the country forward. He appointed a number of trusted individuals to his cabinet, some of whom were reform-minded, while others were more closely aligned with the stalwarts. His cabinet selections were a delicate balancing act, as he sought to maintain unity within his own party, while also demonstrating his willingness to embrace the reforms that were increasingly being demanded by the public. One of the most important issues Arthur faced early in his presidency was the growing movement for civil service reform. The assassination of President Garfield, carried out by an office seeker frustrated with being denied a patronage position, brought the flaws of the patronage system into sharp focus. Public sentiment was turning in favour of reform, and the political divisions between the stalwarts and the reform-minded half-breeds had deepened. The nation was calling for change, and Arthur knew that he would have to take action. The issue of civil service reform was a defining moment in Arthur's presidency. In the years leading up to his time in office, the patronage system had been a major source of political power, but it was increasingly seen as corrupt and inefficient. The desire for a more merit-based system of government appointments was growing, and Arthur, who had been a staunch supporter of the patronage system in the past, found himself at a crossroads. Would he continue to support the old system that had brought him to power, or would he embrace the reform efforts that were sweeping the nation? Arthur's decision to support civil service reform was not immediate, but over time he became convinced that the country needed a new approach. He realised that the patronage system was no longer sustainable, and that if the country was to move forward, the government had to become more professional and meritocratic. This shift in thinking would come to define his presidency and would have a lasting impact on the way American government operated. One of Arthur's key actions in support of reform was his endorsement of the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. In 1883, after much deliberation, Arthur signed the Pendleton Act into law, a historic piece of legislation that laid the foundation for the modern civil service system. The Pendleton Act established a merit-based system for hiring federal employees and aimed to eliminate the political patronage system that had long been a feature of American government. Under the new law, government jobs would be awarded based on qualifications and ability, rather than political connections. The passage of the Pendleton Act was a landmark moment in Arthur's presidency and in American political history. It was a bold step away from the patronage system that had dominated the political landscape for so long. Although the Act was not a comprehensive overhaul of the civil service, it represented a major shift in the way government appointments were handled. The Pendleton Act would go on to have a profound impact on the federal government, paving the way for future reforms that would continue to shape the nature of American politics. Arthur's decision to support civil service reform was not without its challenges. The stalwarts, who had supported him throughout his political career, were deeply opposed to the Pendleton Act, as it threatened their power and influence within the political machine. However, Arthur, recognizing the growing public demand for change, was willing to stand firm in the face of political opposition. His support for the Pendleton Act was a significant break from his past, and it demonstrated his willingness to act in the best interests of the nation, even if it meant alienating some of his political allies. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act marked the beginning of a new era in American government. It laid the groundwork for a more professional and efficient federal workforce, and helped to reduce the influence of patronage and political favoritism in government appointments. While the law did not completely eliminate the patronage system, it was an important first step in the effort to reform the federal bureaucracy. In the early days of his presidency, Chester A. Arthur faced immense challenges. The country was still recovering from the trauma of Garfield's assassination, and the political divisions within the Republican Party were as strong as ever. Yet Arthur showed that he was capable of leading with steady resolve. His early actions, particularly his support for civil service reform, set the stage for a presidency that, while marked by political controversy, ultimately left a lasting legacy of reform. One of the most enduring legacies of Chester A. Arthur's presidency was his support for civil service reform, epitomised by the passage of the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act in 1883. The assassination of President James A. Garfield had cast a spotlight on the corrupt and inefficient patronage system that dominated American politics, and Arthur, despite his long association with that very system, rose to the occasion by endorsing the reform. Before the Pendleton Act, the patronage system, or the spoils system, as it was often called, was the method by which government positions were filled based on political loyalty rather than merit. This system allowed elected officials to reward political supporters with government jobs, often without regard to their qualifications or abilities. The result was widespread inefficiency, corruption, and favoritism. It was a system that had helped propel Arthur's rise to the presidency, but by 1881 it was clear that the public was no longer willing to tolerate it. The assassination of President Garfield by Charles J. Guiteau, a disappointed office seeker, highlighted the dangers of the patronage system. Guiteau had sought a government position and, when he was denied, blamed Garfield for his failure to secure the job. His anger, rooted in the patronage system, led to the tragic killing of Garfield. The nation was shaken by the murder, and the need for reform became undeniable. The idea that government positions should be awarded based on merit rather than political loyalty began to gain significant traction. Chester A. Arthur, who had spent much of his political career as a staunch supporter of the patronage system, found himself at a crossroads. The political winds were changing, and the country was demanding reform. For many, it seemed unthinkable that someone with Arthur's background in the political machine would champion such a change. However, Arthur, who had always been pragmatic, recognized that the political landscape had shifted. He understood that in order to maintain his presidency and the respect of the American people, he would have to support reform. In 1883, after a period of deliberation, Arthur signed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act into law. The act established a merit-based system for hiring and promoting federal employees, eliminating the patronage system for most government jobs. The law created the Civil Service Commission, which was tasked with overseeing the new system and ensuring that government employees were hired based on their qualifications rather than political connections. The Pendleton Act was a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and it marked a significant departure from the practices that had long dominated American politics. The passage of the Pendleton Act was a testament to Arthur's political evolution. Despite his deep roots in the patronage system, he'd come to realize that the system was flawed and unsustainable. By supporting the Pendleton Act, Arthur not only responded to the public outcry for reform, but he also set a precedent for future presidents to follow. The act paved the way for a more professional, efficient, and ethical federal government. The Pendleton Act was not without its critics. The stalwarts, the faction of the Republican Party with whom Arthur had long been aligned, were disappointed by his support for the measure. Many saw it as betrayal of the political system that had helped elevate him to power. However, Arthur's decision to back the reform demonstrated his willingness to rise above political expediency and do what was right for the country. In doing so, he gained the respect of reformers and others who had long called for a change in the way government appointments were made. While the Pendleton Act did not immediately eliminate patronage altogether, it was a crucial step in the process of civil service reform. It established the principle that government jobs should be awarded based on ability and merit, not political connections. The Act laid the groundwork for further reforms in the coming decades, and it marked a turning point in the way the federal government operated. Arthur's support for the Pendleton Act also reshaped his legacy. While he had been a figure closely associated with the political machine and patronage, his embrace of civil service reform demonstrated a capacity for growth and change. It also proved that Arthur was not merely a product of the political system he had helped build, but a leader who could adapt to the needs of the times. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act had far-reaching effects on American politics. Over time, it expanded to include more federal jobs, and its principles became a cornerstone of modern public administration. The law helped to professionalize the federal workforce and made it more accountable to the public. It also reduced the influence of political machines and patronage, which had long been a source of corruption in government. In addition to its practical effects, the Pendleton Act symbolized a shift in American politics toward a more modern, meritocratic system. The idea that government service should be based on ability and expertise, rather than political favoritism, became a guiding principle for the federal government. This change was not immediate, and the patronage system did not disappear overnight. But the Pendleton Act set the stage for future reforms that would continue to shape the way government worked. In the end, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act stands as one of the most significant achievements of Chester A. Arthur's presidency. Though he had been closely aligned with the patronage system, Arthur's decision to support the reform demonstrated his ability to rise above political pressures and make a bold decision in the best interest of the country. The Pendleton Act marked a turning point in the history of American government, and its legacy endures to this day. One of the most controversial pieces of legislation passed during Chester A. Arthur's presidency was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This law, which banned the immigration of Chinese laborers to the United States, marked a significant moment in American immigration policy and highlighted the growing racial tensions of the era. Although Arthur was not a strong advocate for the act, his decision to sign it into law has remained a defining aspect of his presidency, and it offers a glimpse into the complexities of his leadership during a time of rising nationalism and racial prejudice. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the culmination of years of anti-Chinese sentiment in the United States, particularly in the western states. The economic competition between Chinese laborers and American workers had become a point of contention, especially as Chinese immigrants were seen as willing to work for lower wages. This resentment was compounded by racial prejudice, as Chinese immigrants were often viewed as racially inferior and unassimilable into American society. The Chinese community, particularly in California, became the target of violent discrimination, and many political leaders began to advocate for laws that would limit their presence in the country. The push for the Chinese Exclusion Act gained momentum during the 1870s and 1880s, as labor unions and political leaders, especially in the West, argued that Chinese workers were undermining the wages and working conditions of native-born Americans. The economic downturn during the early 1880s also fueled anti-immigrant sentiment, with many blaming the influx of Chinese immigrants for the high unemployment rates in certain areas. Arthur, who had long been aligned with the Republican Party's more conservative elements, found himself in a difficult position when it came to the issue of immigration. On one hand, he was sympathetic to the labor unions that sought to restrict Chinese immigration, but on the other hand, he was aware of the potential political consequences of signing such a divisive bill into law. The growing political pressure from the Western states, along with the political support for the law from his party, ultimately led Arthur to support the Chinese Exclusion Act, even though he had reservations about its long-term implications. The act itself prohibited the immigration of Chinese laborers for 10 years and made it more difficult for Chinese immigrants already in the United States to gain citizenship. While it allowed for some exemptions, such as for merchants, students, and diplomats, the law was a clear signal that the United States was willing to close its doors to Chinese immigrants, a policy that would continue for decades. Arthur's decision to sign the Chinese Exclusion Act was a politically calculated move. At the time, the political landscape was heavily shaped by the interests of labor unions and the need to maintain support among the working class. While Arthur may not have personally supported the harsh measures of the law, he understood that it was a political reality in the context of the era. His signature on the bill therefore represented a compromise between the political forces demanding exclusion and the growing influence of the nativist movement that sought to limit immigration from Asia. Despite the political considerations, the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act had significant consequences. It marked the first time in US history that a specific racial or ethnic group was targeted for exclusion based on race and nationality. The Act set a dangerous precedent for future immigration laws and contributed to the deepening racial divisions within American society. It also solidified the growing sense of American nationalism and racial purity, which would continue to shape the country's immigration policies for years to come. The Chinese Exclusion Act was not a moment of pride for Chester A. Arthur, and it remains one of the more controversial aspects of his presidency. Though he was not the driving force behind the law, his decision to sign it into effect speaks to the complex dynamics of his leadership. During a period of social and political upheaval, the law reflected the pressures of the time, economic, racial, and political, and Arthur's decision to support it was a reflection of the challenges he faced as president. In the years following the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, the US government would continue to pass increasingly restrictive immigration laws, targeting not only the Chinese but also other groups seen as undesirable. The Chinese Exclusion Act remained in effect, with various extensions and amendments until its repeal in 1943 during World War II. The Act's legacy is a reminder of the deep racial prejudices that shaped American immigration policy in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. For Arthur, the signing of the Chinese Exclusion Act was a politically pragmatic decision, but it was also one that left a dark mark on his presidency. It served as a reminder that despite his efforts at civil service reform and modernization, his presidency was also defined by the racial and political realities of the time. The Chinese Exclusion Act stands as one of the more difficult chapters in American history, and it remains a controversial part of Chester A. Arthur's legacy. One of the most contentious issues during Chester A. Arthur's presidency was the question of tariffs and protectionism, which was central to the economic debates of the late 19th century. At the time, the United States was grappling with rapid industrialization, the expansion of railroads, and growing concerns about the nation's economic future. The tariff, which imposed taxes on imported goods, had long been a source of debate, and it became a focal point of Arthur's administration. His stance on tariffs played a crucial role in shaping his presidency and his legacy. In the late 1800s, tariffs were seen as a way to protect American industries from foreign competition, particularly from European manufacturers. The idea was that by imposing tariffs on imported goods, the US could encourage the growth of domestic industries, create jobs, and promote economic self-sufficiency. However, tariffs also had significant drawbacks, particularly for consumers, who were often forced to pay higher prices for goods due to the increased costs of imported products. Arthur inherited the tariff debate from his predecessors, and it was an issue that was deeply intertwined with the broader political landscape. The Republican Party, which Arthur represented, had traditionally supported high tariffs as a means of protecting American businesses. On the other hand, many Democrats and reform-minded individuals argued that tariffs were benefiting wealthy industrialists at the expense of ordinary consumers and farmers. One of the major pieces of legislation on tariffs during Arthur's presidency was the Tariff Act of 1883, also known as the Mongrel Tariff. The act was a compromise between the competing interests of protectionists and those calling for tariff reform. Arthur, though a staunch supporter of protective tariffs, faced pressure from both sides. While many Republicans supported high tariffs to protect American industries, there was also a growing demand for tariff reductions, especially from farmers and consumers who were burdened by the rising costs of goods. The Mongrel Tariff, which was passed in 1883, lowered some tariff rates but left many high tariffs intact. It was considered a moderate reform, attempting to balance the competing interests of protectionism and free trade. The Act reduced the rates on certain imported goods such as raw materials, but left tariffs on manufactured goods relatively high. This compromise aimed to address the concerns of both sides, but it was also criticized for not going far enough in reducing the overall tariff burden. Arthur's support for the Mongrel Tariff reflected his belief in the protection of American industries, but it also demonstrated his political pragmatism. He understood that the tariff issue was a deeply divisive one, and he sought a middle ground that would satisfy both the protectionists and the reformers. While the tariff was lowered in some areas, it remained a contentious issue throughout Arthur's presidency, and the debate would continue to shape American politics for decades. One of the key consequences of the Tariff Act of 1883 was that it highlighted the growing tension between the interests of big business and those of ordinary consumers. Protectionism, while beneficial to industrialists, often came at the expense of the general public, who faced higher prices for goods due to the tariffs. This dynamic would continue to be a point of contention in American politics, as the nation struggled to find a balance between economic protectionism and free market principles. Arthur's stance on the tariff issue reflected the broader economic philosophy of his time, one that favoured the interests of business and industry, while some of his actions, such as his support for civil service reform, showed a more progressive side. His approach to tariffs demonstrated his alignment with the traditional Republican values of protectionism and economic interventionism. This contrast between reform and conservatism marked the complexity of his presidency and the challenges he faced in navigating the political landscape of the time. The issue of tariffs was not only important for economic reasons, but also had significant political implications. The debate over protectionism was closely tied to the broader struggle for political power in the United States. The Republican Party, which was more aligned with industrial interests, supported high tariffs, while the Democratic Party, which had a strong base among farmers and labourers, advocated for lower tariffs. The outcome of the tariff debate would have lasting effects on the political direction of the country. By the time Arthur left office in 1885, the tariff issue remained unresolved. The mongrel tariff was seen as a temporary compromise, and it did not fully satisfy either side of the debate. However, Arthur's handling of the issue demonstrated his ability to navigate the complexities of political compromise. Though he was deeply committed to the protection of American industries, he also recognized the need for some level of reform. His approach to the tariff issue highlighted the difficulties of balancing economic interests and political realities in a rapidly changing America. In the years that followed, the debate over tariffs would continue to shape American politics. The issue would be revisited in the 1890s with the passage of the McKinley Tariff, which raised tariffs even higher, and later with the Underwood Tariff of 1913, which significantly lowered tariff rates. The tariff debate remained a central issue in American politics, and its influence on the nation's economic policies can still be felt today. Arthur's presidency, while not as revolutionary as some of his contemporaries, was nonetheless marked by significant political and economic challenges. His handling of the tariff issue was emblematic of his pragmatic approach to governance, one that sought to balance competing interests while maintaining political stability. Though his time in office was brief, Arthur's involvement in the tariff debate played a key role in shaping his legacy as a president who navigated the tensions of his time with quiet resolve. Chester A. Arthur's presidency marked a pivotal time in American military history, as the country began to shift its focus towards strengthening its naval power and expanding its military influence across the globe. In the years following the Civil War, the United States had been largely focused on domestic issues, Reconstruction, industrialization, and the growth of the economy. But by the 1880s, America's leaders, including Arthur, began to recognize that a strong military and naval presence was necessary for the nation to maintain its status as a rising global power. One of Arthur's key contributions to this military shift was his efforts to modernize and expand the United States Navy. In the 19th century, the US Navy had not been particularly large or advanced compared to the naval forces of European powers such as Great Britain, France, and Germany. However, Arthur, influenced by the growing imperialistic sentiments of the time, understood that naval strength was crucial for protecting American interests both at home and abroad. Arthur's support for the strengthening of the Navy was part of a broader movement known as the New Navy Program, which aimed to increase the number of modern warships in the fleet. This was not just about defending American shores, but also about expanding the country's influence in global affairs. Arthur's administration oversaw the creation of several new steel-hulled ships, which represented a significant departure from the older wooden ships that had been used in the past. These modern ships, which included powerful warships like the USS Atlanta, helped to elevate the United States Navy to a level that would allow it to compete with the naval forces of European nations. Arthur's decision to invest in a modernized navy was closely tied to his vision of American power and prestige. As the United States continued to expand westward and solidify its control over territories like Alaska, which was purchased from Russia in 1867, the need for a stronger military presence, especially on the seas, became evident. The growing interest in foreign markets, particularly in Asia and Latin America, meant that the United States needed a navy capable of protecting its commercial interests and projecting power across the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. One of the key figures who played a role in this naval expansion was Secretary of the Navy, William E. Chandler. Chandler, appointed by Arthur in 1882, was a strong proponent of modernizing the Navy and expanding the fleet. Under Chandler's leadership, the Navy saw significant improvements in its ships and technology, including the development of steam-powered vessels and ironclad warships. These ships were faster, more durable, and far more effective than the traditional wooden vessels that had been used in previous decades. Arthur's commitment to military expansion wasn't limited to the Navy. His presidency also saw the establishment of the Naval War College in 1884, an institution that was designed to educate and train naval officers in the principles of strategy and warfare. The creation of the War College reflected the growing recognition that military expertise was essential for success in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The college would go on to become an important centre for naval strategy, and would play a key role in the development of the US Navy's tactics and planning. Arthur's support for military expansion and modernization was also motivated by the need to protect American interests in newly acquired territories, including those in the Pacific. In the 1880s, the United States began to extend its influence in the Pacific Islands, with the acquisition of lands like Hawaii, which would later become a US state in 1959. The US Navy was seen as a crucial tool for asserting American dominance in these distant regions, and for ensuring that the country could protect its economic and geopolitical interests. Arthur's decision to prioritize military modernization was not universally popular, particularly among those who believed that the United States should focus more on domestic issues. Critics of military expansion argued that the resources spent on strengthening the Navy could have been better used to address the country's economic challenges or to reform domestic institutions. However, Arthur's vision for a stronger military was also in line with the broader national mood, which was beginning to shift towards a more interventionist and imperialistic foreign policy. While Arthur's presidency was relatively short, his efforts to modernize the Navy laid the groundwork for the military expansion that would continue throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The United States would go on to build a powerful naval fleet, one that would play a central role in the country's involvement in World War I and beyond. The Navy's strength and technological advancements would be essential in establishing the United States as a major global power. Arthur's actions during his presidency reflected a growing awareness of the United States' place in the world. He understood that, as the country continued to grow economically and politically, it would need to assert itself on the global stage. A strong navy and military presence were seen as essential for protecting American interests and securing the country's position as a rising global power. Though his time in office was brief, Chester A. Arthur's legacy in terms of military expansion and modernization was significant. His support for the Navy, the creation of the Naval War College, and his push for a more modernized military helped to shape the trajectory of US foreign policy and military strategy in the years that followed. The United States was poised to become a dominant force in the world, and Arthur's efforts laid the foundation for that rise. Chester A. Arthur's presidency, while often overlooked in the broader sweep of American history, offers valuable insights into the nature of leadership during a period of significant political and social change. Arthur's style of governance was shaped by his background in law, his experience in the political machine of New York, and the circumstances of his unexpected rise to the presidency. His leadership was often marked by a quiet confidence, a focus on administrative competence, and a pragmatic approach to the challenges facing the nation. One of the key characteristics of Arthur's leadership was his calm demeanour. Unlike some of his more fiery predecessors, Arthur was not prone to public displays of emotion or dramatic gestures. Instead, he approached the presidency with a steady hand, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. This made him an effective leader during a time when the country was still recovering from the Civil War and grappling with the complexities of industrialization and immigration. In an era of political turmoil and division, Arthur's calm and methodical approach provided a sense of stability to the nation. Arthur's leadership was also defined by his pragmatism. He was a president who understood the political realities of his time and worked within the existing system to achieve his goals. He was not an ideologue, nor was he driven by a particular set of philosophical beliefs. Instead, he focused on the practical aspects of governance, seeking solutions that would help maintain the stability of the country and the integrity of the political system. This pragmatic approach allowed Arthur to navigate the complex political landscape of his time and to achieve significant accomplishments, particularly in the areas of civil service reform and military expansion. One of the defining moments of Arthur's presidency was his decision to embrace civil service reform, even though he had previously been a staunch supporter of the patronage system. His support for the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, which established a merit-based system for federal appointments, demonstrated his ability to adapt to changing political dynamics. While his decision to back the reform was not popular with his political allies in the stalwart faction, it showcased his willingness to put the interests of the nation above party loyalty. Arthur's decision to sign the Pendleton Act into law marked a turning point in his presidency and solidified his reputation as a leader who could rise above political pressures when necessary. Arthur's style of governance also reflected his belief in the importance of competence and professionalism in government. His background as a lawyer and his experience managing the Port of New York had instilled in him a strong sense of order and efficiency. He believed that the federal government should be run in a manner that was both effective and free from the corruption that had plagued the political system. This focus on administrative efficiency was evident in his appointments to key government positions. Arthur was known for selecting individuals based on their qualifications rather than their political connections, a practice that helped to improve the quality of the federal workforce. Despite his commitment to professionalism and reform, Arthur was not immune to the political realities of his time. He faced constant pressure from the political machines and factions within his own party, and his leadership style had to account for these competing interests. At times, Arthur's pragmatism meant that he had to make difficult compromises, particularly on issues such as tariffs and immigration. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which he reluctantly signed into law, is a prime example of how Arthur's leadership was shaped by political considerations. Though he personally had reservations about the law, he ultimately supported it in the face of overwhelming political pressure. Arthur's leadership was also characterized by his ability to maintain a sense of dignity and decorum in office. His refined manners and polished public persona made him a respected figure in both domestic and international circles. This was especially important during a time when the presidency was often seen as the symbol of American ideals and values. Arthur's dignified approach to the presidency helped to restore public confidence in the office after the tumultuous years of Garfield's assassination and the ongoing political divisions within the country. However, Arthur was not without his critics. Some viewed him as a product of the political machine, too tied to the patronage system to bring about meaningful change. Others criticized him for being too cautious in his approach to issues such as civil rights and economic inequality. Yet, despite these criticisms, Arthur's presidency can be seen as a period of quiet transformation. His leadership was not marked by grand speeches or sweeping reforms, but by steady, measured actions that helped to shape the direction of the country during a time of political and social upheaval. In many ways, Arthur's leadership style can be understood as a reflection of the broader political climate of the late 19th century. The country was transitioning from a period of reconstruction and civil war to a time of industrial growth, urbanization, and increasing international influence. Arthur's presidency was defined by his ability to manage the competing forces of reform and tradition, all while maintaining a steady hand at the helm of the nation's government. By the time Arthur left office in 1885, he had earned the respect of many of his contemporaries, even if his presidency had not been marked by the dramatic changes that some of his predecessors had implemented. His quiet, pragmatic leadership helped to guide the country through a challenging period, and his support for civil service reform and military expansion left a lasting legacy. Though his time in office was short, Chester A. Arthur's leadership demonstrated the importance of calm, competent governance during times of uncertainty. As Chester A. Arthur's presidency continued, the question of whether he would seek a second term became a topic of political speculation. Although Arthur had proven himself as capable administrator, the political landscape of the late 19th century was shifting, and a new generation of reform-minded leaders was beginning to make their presence known. In 1884, the United States faced an important presidential election, one that would determine not only the future of the Republican Party, but also the direction of the nation in a time of growing political and social change. The 1884 election was a critical moment in American history, as it marked the end of an era of political machines and patronage, and the beginning of a more modern, meritocratic approach to governance. The Republican Party, which had been divided by internal factions throughout Arthur's presidency, was now faced with the prospect of either continuing with the status quo or embracing a new vision for the future. While Arthur had been a staunch defender of the political machine and the patronage system, his support for civil service reform and his willingness to embrace certain aspects of change had left him in a precarious political position. Arthur's decision not to seek re-election in 1884 was largely influenced by his declining health and the increasing pressure from both political factions within the Republican Party. Though he had made significant strides in modernizing the government and addressing some of the nation's pressing issues, such as civil service reform, Arthur faced a difficult political environment. His association with the stalwarts and the patronage system made him a controversial figure among the more reform-oriented Republicans, while the Democratic Party was energized by the candidacy of Grover Cleveland, a reform-minded governor from New York. Cleveland's candidacy represented a challenge to the status quo. He was seen as a man of integrity, a champion of reform who had built a reputation for rooting out corruption in New York. His platform focused on reducing government corruption, lowering tariffs, and advocating for civil service reform. Cleveland's appeal to the growing reform movement, along with his personal integrity and clean political record, made him a formidable opponent to Arthur's brand of politics. The 1884 election also saw a shift in the American electorate. The rise of the urban working class, the expansion of industry, and the increasing political influence of labor unions meant that issues such as economic policy, immigration, and the role of government in regulating industry were becoming more prominent. Cleveland, with his focus on economic reform and his commitment to civil service, appealed to the growing number of Americans who were dissatisfied with the entrenched political machines and the corrupt system of patronage. Arthur, recognizing the changing political tides and the growing support for reform, made the decision not to seek re-election. His decision was seen as a pragmatic one, as he understood that his association with the old political order and the patronage system would make it difficult for him to win a second term. His health, too, was a factor. Arthur had been suffering from a variety of health issues during his presidency, and the toll of the office had become apparent. In the 1884 election, Grover Cleveland won a narrow victory over the Republican nominee James G. Blaine, with Arthur's decision not to seek re-election paving the way for the Democratic Party to take control of the White House. The election was marked by fierce campaigning and personal attacks, with both parties accusing each other of corruption and dishonesty. Cleveland's victory was seen as a repudiation of the old political machines and a signal that the country was ready for a new era of reform and change. Arthur's decision to step aside from the 1884 election marked the end of his political career. Though he had served only one term as president, his time in office had been marked by significant accomplishments, including civil service reform and efforts to modernize the military. However, his legacy was complicated by his association with the patronage system and the political machine, which continued to shape American politics even after he left office. After leaving the presidency, Arthur retired from public life and returned to his law practice in New York. He continued to be active in various civic and political circles, but his health continued to decline. In 1886, just 2 years after leaving office, Arthur passed away from a stroke. His death marked the end of an era as the political landscape was quickly changing and a new generation of leaders was emerging to take the country in a new direction. The election of 1884 and Arthur's decision not to seek re-election marked a pivotal moment in American history. It signalled the end of an era of political machines and patronage and the beginning of a more modern, reform-oriented approach to governance. Arthur's legacy, though complex, remains an important part of the history of the Republican Party and the evolution of American political institutions. Chestre. Arthur's time in office came to a close in 1885, after a presidency marked by significant challenges and substantial achievements, albeit overshadowed by his unexpected rise to power. Though he had not actively sought the presidency, Arthur's actions and decisions had an enduring impact on the country, particularly in the areas of civil service reform, military expansion, and the modernization of the US Navy. By the time his term ended, the country was beginning to transition into a new political era, one that would see the Republican Party and the nation as a whole grappling with the complexities of the Gilded Age. As his presidency drew to a close, Arthur, increasingly frail and suffering from health issues, made the decision not to seek re-election in 1884. His political career had been characterized by his pragmatism and steady leadership, but it was also deeply tied to the political machine that had supported him, first in New York and later within the Republican Party. Despite his significant accomplishments, particularly in terms of civil service reform, Arthur's association with patronage and the stalwart faction of the Republican Party left him with a complicated legacy. The decision to step aside from the 1884 race was not a surprise. Arthur had already been dealing with deteriorating health throughout his presidency. In fact, he had suffered from nephritis, a kidney disease that caused significant physical pain and exhaustion. His health issues, combined with the political pressures of leading during such a contentious time, led him to conclude that stepping away from the political stage was in the best interest of both himself and the country. He did not actively campaign for a second term, and instead allowed his vice president, Thomas A. Hendricks, to attempt to claim the nomination. Arthur's decision not to run in 1884 was seen as both a personal and political choice. It reflected his understanding of the changing political dynamics in the United States, and his awareness that the era of political patronage was slowly drawing to a close. While he had long been associated with the stalwarts and the political machine, the country was increasingly demanding reforms and a break from the old ways of doing politics. Grover Cleveland's successful presidential campaign, which focused on civil service reform and anti-corruption, marked a clear break from the past. Cleveland's victory also signalled that a new wave of reformers was rising to power, and that the country's priorities were shifting away from the old political order that had given rise to Arthur's presidency. Arthur's departure from the White House in March 1885 marked the end of an era. His presidency had been brief, lasting only a little more than 3 years, but his impact was significant. Under his leadership, the United States took important steps toward modernizing its government, military, and civil service. His endorsement of the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, which established a merit-based system for federal hiring, is one of the most lasting legacies of his time in office. The act helped reduce the influence of patronage and laid the groundwork for future civil service reforms. It marked a shift away from the political spoil system that had long been a fixture of American politics. In addition to his support for civil service reform, Arthur's efforts to modernize the US Navy and expand its global reach were pivotal. He played a key role in the expansion of the Navy, commissioning new ships and advocating for military readiness in a world that was increasingly interconnected. His leadership helped position the United States as a more prominent military power, one capable of projecting influence abroad. These efforts would later help the country assert itself in international affairs, particularly during the Spanish-American War at the turn of the century. Yet, despite these accomplishments, Arthur's presidency was often overshadowed by the political realities of the time. His association with the political machine, his support for the patronage system, and the complicated legacy of his rise to power left him with a mixed reputation. Many viewed him as a transitional figure, someone who had been thrust into the presidency under unusual circumstances and who was caught between competing factions within his own party. Still, Arthur's quiet competence and his ability to navigate the tumultuous political landscape of his time left a lasting impact on the way the US government would operate in the future. As Arthur left office, the political scene was already shifting. The country was moving away from the politics of patronage and machine politics, and the rise of the reform movement signalled the start of a new era in American governance. Arthur's decision to embrace civil service reform, despite his ties to the old political system, reflected his adaptability and his understanding of the changing political environment. After leaving the White House, Arthur returned to private life. His health continued to decline, and in 1886, just 2 years after his presidency ended, he passed away at the age of 57. His death marked the end of a life that had been marked by both political success and personal tragedy. While he may not have been remembered as one of the most transformative presidents in American history, Chester A. Arthur's presidency was crucial in moving the country toward a more modern, meritocratic system of government. After his presidency, Chester A. Arthur retreated from the political spotlight and returned to a quieter, private life in New York City. His time in the White House had been brief but impactful, and his decision not to seek re-election in 1884 allowed him to step away from the pressures of national leadership. While he was no longer in office, Arthur continued to play a role in civic life, though his health, which had been deteriorating throughout his presidency, would soon limit his ability to participate in public affairs. Arthur's health had been a concern throughout his presidency. He'd been suffering from nephritis, a kidney disease that caused significant pain and fatigue. Despite the strain that the office of the presidency placed on his body, Arthur's calm demeanour and quiet leadership style masked the toll it took on his physical well-being. The demands of the presidency, combined with his ongoing health issues, made it increasingly difficult for him to carry out his duties as effectively as he might have hoped. However, the decision not to seek re-election in 1884 allowed Arthur to return to a private life that, while still influenced by his political background, was much less public and demanding. Though he was no longer in the political arena, Arthur's post-presidency years were still shaped by his experience in public office. He returned to his law practice in New York City, where he had established a successful career before his political rise. He had a few legal cases, but his declining health kept him from fully re-engaging in his profession. Still, he found some comfort in the familiar work and the opportunity to live more privately, away from the pressures of national politics. Arthur's time away from the White House was marked by a shift in the public perception of his presidency. When he left office in 1885, he was not immediately seen as a great reformer or a transformative figure. However, over time, his legacy began to evolve. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, which he had signed into law, became a cornerstone of his presidential legacy. The act helped to change the way federal jobs were awarded, making the government more efficient and less prone to the corruption of patronage. Though Arthur had initially been a supporter of the patronage system, his decision to embrace civil service reform reflected his ability to adapt to the changing political climate and to do what was best for the nation. In addition to his support for civil service reform, Arthur's efforts to modernize the US Navy and expand the military had lasting consequences for the country. His leadership in these areas helped position the United States as a growing power on the world stage, and the Navy, which had been strengthened during his presidency, would go on to play a crucial role in future military conflicts, including the Spanish-American War. Despite these accomplishments, Arthur's post-presidential years were marred by his failing health. In the early months of 1886, he suffered a stroke and was never able to recover fully. His health continued to decline, and on November 18, 1886, Chester A. Arthur passed away at the age of 57. His death came just 2 years after he left office, and it marked the end of a life that had been defined by both public service and personal struggle. Though he had not sought fame or recognition, Arthur's legacy in the years following his death began to take shape as historians and political analysts began to re-evaluate his contributions. Arthur was buried in the Albany Rural Cemetery in Menands, New York, not far from his birthplace in Vermont. His passing, though relatively quiet, marked the end of his journey from the political machine of New York to the White House, and his death prompted reflections on his time in office. While he was not widely seen as a transformative president in the same vein as some of his more famous contemporaries, such as Abraham Lincoln or Theodore Roosevelt, Arthur's presidency had laid important groundwork for future reforms. In the years following his death, the public came to appreciate the quiet dignity and the steady leadership that Arthur had brought to the office of president. His support for civil service reform, his efforts to modernize the US Navy, and his ability to navigate a complex political environment marked his presidency as one of quiet but important progress. Arthur's legacy, though initially overshadowed by his association with the political machine, became more clearly defined as historians recognized his contributions to the country's evolving political and military systems. Today, Chester A. Arthur's legacy is remembered as one of pragmatic leadership. He was a president who, despite being thrust into office unexpectedly, navigated the complexities of his time with quiet competence. His actions, particularly in the areas of civil service reform and military modernization, had lasting effects on the structure of the US government and its place in the world. Though his presidency was brief, Arthur's ability to adapt to the changing political landscape of the Gilded Age demonstrated the resilience of a leader who rose to the occasion when called upon. Chester A. Arthur's presidency, though brief, was not without lasting impact on the direction of American politics and governance. When he assumed office following the assassination of President Garfield, Arthur inherited a country deeply divided by political factions, social change, and economic challenges. Yet, despite his relatively short tenure, Arthur made significant contributions to the structure and functioning of the federal government, shaping key aspects of policy that would resonate long after his departure from the White House. Civil service reform. The most notable of Arthur's lasting contributions was his support for civil service reform, which culminated in the passage of the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883. Before Arthur's presidency, the patronage system, or the spoils system, had been the standard method for appointing government officials. Under this system, jobs in the federal government were often awarded based on political loyalty rather than merit, leading to inefficiency and corruption. Arthur, a product of this very system, initially supported patronage, as it had been a cornerstone of his political career. However, after Garfield's assassination, an event that stemmed from an office seeker's frustration with being denied a government job, Arthur became a proponent of reform. The Pendleton Act, which he signed into law, required that many federal positions be filled based on merit and qualifications, rather than political connections. This landmark law created the Civil Service Commission, which began the process of establishing a more professional, non-partisan workforce within the federal government. Though the Pendleton Act did not completely dismantle the patronage system, it represented a significant shift in US government practices. It laid the groundwork for future civil service reforms and set a precedent for government employees to be hired and promoted based on their skills and qualifications. Over time, the Pendleton Act would help curb the corruption associated with patronage and would play a crucial role in professionalizing the federal bureaucracy. Military modernization and naval expansion. Another lasting legacy of Arthur's presidency was his support for the modernization of the US Navy and military. In the late 19th century, as American industries expanded and the country began to look outward for trade and influence, the need for a strong military presence on the global stage became increasingly apparent. The US Navy, which had been relatively underdeveloped compared to the navies of European powers, was seen as a critical element of American power and security. Arthur's administration oversaw the construction of several new warships, including modern steel-hulled ships that replaced the older wooden vessels. His support for the expansion of the Navy was part of a broader movement to assert American influence in the Pacific and around the world. This emphasis on military strength laid the foundation for the Navy's crucial role in future conflicts, particularly the Spanish-American War in 1898. Arthur also supported the establishment of the Naval War College in 1884, which would later become a center for the development of naval strategy and tactics. The War College helped to ensure that USC naval officers were well trained in the principles of modern warfare, which would become important as the United States began to assert itself on the global stage. The expansion of the military and the Navy during Arthur's presidency was not just about defense, but also about projecting American power and securing its commercial interests abroad. This shift would eventually help the United States become a major international player, particularly in the 20th century, as global conflicts and trade networks expanded. A pragmatic presidency. Arthur's presidency was marked by pragmatism and a focus on practical solutions. While he may not have been a particularly charismatic leader, his ability to navigate the complex political environment of his time allowed him to achieve key reforms. Arthur's leadership was not defined by grand speeches or dramatic changes, but by his steady, competent approach to governance. Though his association with the political machine and patronage system initially cast a shadow over his legacy, Arthur's willingness to embrace civil service reform and to modernize the military demonstrated his adaptability and commitment to progress. His presidency was a transitionary period between the political machine politics of the Gilded Age and the reform-minded movements that would take hold in the coming decades. Arthur's presidency is a reminder that leadership is not always about sweeping changes or dramatic reforms. Sometimes it is about making steady progress and responding to the needs of the moment. His decision to support civil service reform despite his past political ties demonstrated a rare willingness to evolve. By the time he left office in 1885, the country was in a better position to deal with the challenges of the coming century, thanks in part to the reforms that Arthur had championed. A quiet legacy. Chester A. Arthur's quiet, steady leadership left a legacy that continues to shape American governance today. Though he did not have the impact of some of his more famous contemporaries, Arthur's contributions to civil service reform, military modernization, and the overall professionalism of the US government cannot be overlooked. His presidency may have been brief, but it was pivotal in guiding the nation through a time of change and laying the groundwork for the reforms that would follow. Arthur's legacy also serves as a reminder that even presidents who are not at the center of dramatic political movements can still leave lasting marks on history. His ability to adapt to the changing political landscape of his time and to act in the best interests of the country, even when it meant defying his political allies, is a testament to his pragmatic and thoughtful leadership. Though often regarded as a transitional president, Chester A. Arthur's contributions to the shaping of the modern American government are undeniable. His actions laid the foundation for future reforms and positioned the United States for the challenges of the 20th century. Today, Arthur is remembered as a competent, pragmatic leader who, despite his initial associations with patronage and political machines, helped guide the nation toward a more efficient and professional government. Chester A. Arthur's presidency is often viewed as a transitional one, a bridge between the political machines and the reform movements that would come to define American politics in the 20th century. His time in office was marked by pragmatism, quiet competence, and his ability to adapt to the shifting political climate. Though Arthur may not have been a transformative or dramatic figure like some of his contemporaries, his presidency was crucial in shaping the course of American government and laying the groundwork for future reforms. Arthur's background in New York's political machine, particularly his ties to the stalwart faction and the patronage system, initially cast a shadow over his presidency. When he assumed office in 1881 after the assassination of President Garfield, many doubted his ability to rise above his political affiliations and lead the country with integrity. However, Arthur's actions during his time in office proved that he was capable of adapting to the demands of the moment. One of the most significant aspects of Arthur's presidency was his support for civil service reform. Despite his earlier career as a product of the patronage system, Arthur recognized the need for change after the assassination of Garfield, which had been carried out by a disgruntled office seeker. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, which Arthur signed into law, marked a pivotal moment in American political history. The act established a merit-based system for federal appointments, reducing the influence of patronage and making the government more professional and efficient. Arthur's embrace of civil service reform was a departure from the political machine politics that had brought him to power, but it was also a sign of his political adaptability. He understood that the country was demanding change, and that the old ways of doing politics could no longer continue. By supporting the Pendleton Act, Arthur not only secured his legacy as a president who took action in the face of national challenges, but he also played a crucial role in modernizing the federal government. While civil service reform was perhaps the most significant achievement of his presidency, Arthur's contributions were not limited to that area alone. He also took steps to strengthen the US military, particularly the Navy, which had been seen as underdeveloped compared to the powerful navies of European nations. Arthur's support for the Navy's modernization, including the construction of new steel-hulled warships, helped position the United States as a growing military power. The Navy would later play a key role in the country's involvement in global affairs, particularly during the Spanish-American War. Arthur's presidency also came at a time when the United States was dealing with issues such as immigration, tariffs, and the growing influence of labor unions. While his decisions on these matters were often pragmatic, Arthur faced considerable pressure from both political factions and the public. His decision to sign the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which restricted Chinese immigration, remains one of the more controversial aspects of his presidency. While the law reflected the racial prejudices of the time, it also demonstrated the complex political environment in which Arthur operated. His ability to navigate such controversies, while not always popular, reflected his sense of duty and his awareness of the shifting political winds. In looking back on Arthur's presidency, it is clear that his time in office was marked by steady progress rather than dramatic change. His leadership style was characterized by quiet competence and a focus on pragmatic solutions to the nation's challenges. He was not a president who sought to make sweeping reforms or implement grand ideological changes, but he was a leader who understood the importance of small, incremental progress. His support for civil service reform, military expansion, and the modernization of the federal government laid the foundation for the changes that would come in the years following his time in office. Arthur's presidency was also a reflection of the broader political and social climate of the Gilded Age, a period characterized by political corruption, industrial growth, and growing demands for reform. While Arthur was often seen as a product of the political machine, his presidency marked a turning point in the nation's approach to governance. The Pendleton Act, the creation of the modern US, Navy, and his measured approach to governance all demonstrated his ability to rise above the political challenges of the time and navigate the complexities of leadership in an era of change. Though his presidency was brief, Chester A., Arthur's time in office had lasting consequences for the direction of American politics and government. His ability to adapt to the demands of the moment, his support for civil service reform, and his commitment to modernizing the military ensured that his presidency was more than just a transitional one. Today, his legacy is viewed in a more favorable light, as historians and political analysts recognize the significance of his contributions to the country's evolving political system. In the end, Chester A. Arthur's presidency serves as a reminder that leadership is not always about dramatic change or sweeping reforms. Sometimes it is about managing the complexities of the moment, navigating political divisions, and making steady progress toward a more efficient and professional government. Arthur may not have been a president who sought the limelight, but his contributions to the modern American state were significant, and his legacy endures. Chester A. Arthur's presidency was marked by a quiet resolve and a steady hand in navigating some of the most pivotal issues of the late 19th century. Though he served for only a little over 3 years, his time in office set important precedents that would influence the future direction of the United States. While often overlooked in the historical narrative, Arthur's leadership during this transitional period was crucial to the modernization of the American government and military, a legacy of adaptability. One of the most defining aspects of Arthur's presidency was his ability to adapt to the evolving political climate of his time. Initially a figure closely tied to the patronage system and the political machines of New York, Arthur demonstrated a remarkable capacity for growth and reform. After the assassination of President Garfield, Arthur was thrust into the role of president in an atmosphere of political instability and national grief. His rise to the highest office in the land was not something he had sought, and it was clear that Arthur was confronted with the weight of an entire nation's expectations. Rather than sticking rigidly to the ways of the political system that had brought him to power, Arthur quickly recognized the need for change. His decision to embrace civil service reform, despite his previous involvement in patronage politics, was one of the most important steps of his presidency. By signing the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883 into law, Arthur helped lay the groundwork for a more professional and efficient federal government. The act, which established a merit-based system for federal employment, reduced the role of patronage and set a precedent for future administrative reforms. This act continues to be one of his most lasting legacies. Arthur's ability to reconcile his past as a product of the political machine with his role in spearheading civil service reform speaks to his pragmatism. It was not an easy path for a man who had built his political career on the very system he was now working to dismantle. But his leadership in this area demonstrated a keen understanding of the evolving needs of the nation. His willingness to stand firm on the issue of reform despite the political cost marked his presidency as one of progress, however gradual. Military expansion and modernization. Another area where Arthur left a lasting mark was in the strengthening of the United States military, particularly the Navy. At a time when the world was witnessing the growth of industrial powers and expanding global influence, Arthur understood the importance of having a modernized military to protect American interests both at home and abroad. His support for the construction of new steel-hulled warships, which would later form the backbone of the US Navy, helped elevate the country's naval capabilities. The Navy's modernization under Arthur was part of a broader strategy to assert American power in the Pacific and the Western Hemisphere. The creation of a modernized fleet marked a pivotal shift in US foreign policy, one that would become more interventionist in the years to come. Arthur also supported the establishment of the Naval War College in 1884, which became an important centre for naval strategy and education, helping to train future naval officers in the tactics and principles of modern warfare. The expansion of the US military during Arthur's presidency was not just about defence, it was also about increasing the nation's influence on the global stage. As the United States began to engage more with the international community, particularly in Asia and Latin America, a strong military presence was seen as essential for protecting its economic and geopolitical interests. Arthur's efforts in strengthening the navy and laying the groundwork for a more capable military contributed to the USSR's growing status as an emerging global power. Complexity of the political climate. Arthur's presidency unfolded during the Gilded Age, a time marked by rapid industrialization, vast economic inequalities, and deep political divides. The country was moving away from the Reconstruction era and adjusting to the complexities of a rapidly changing social and economic landscape. Arthur, who had come to office under tragic circumstances, had to navigate a political environment that was deeply divided between reformers and those still committed to the old system of patronage. The tensions between the reform-minded half-breeds and the patronage-supporting stalwarts within the Republican Party presented a difficult challenge for Arthur. Though he had been closely aligned with the stalwarts, Arthur made crucial decisions that reflected the growing national demand for change. By the time he left office, the patronage system had been significantly reduced, and the political climate was shifting toward a more merit-based system of governance. While some of Arthur's decisions were politically motivated, they also reflected his ability to govern pragmatically in a time of profound political and social change. Whether dealing with tariff reform, military expansion, or civil service reform, Arthur balanced the demands of different factions with a quiet, unassuming leadership that was effective, if not always dramatic, a quiet but enduring legacy. Looking back at Chester A. Arthur's presidency, it becomes clear that while his time in office was short, his influence was significant. He may not have been as widely celebrated as other presidents, but his steady leadership in times of crisis and his role in pushing forward necessary reforms have ensured his place in American history. His presidency is often seen as a bridge between the political machines of the 19th century and the more modern, reform-oriented government of the 20th century. Arthur's ability to adapt, his commitment to improving the federal government, and his pragmatic leadership during a transitional time allowed him to make a lasting impact. The Pendleton Act, the expansion of the U.S. Navy, and his cautious yet steady governance helped to shape the future trajectory of the United States. Arthur's presidency serves as a reminder that leadership does not always require grand gestures or sweeping reforms. Sometimes the most effective leadership is that which quietly navigates complex political realities, advancing progress in a manner that may not be immediately visible but is felt in the years to come. As time has passed, Chester A. Arthur's presidency has come to be viewed through a different lens. Initially seen as a transitional figure, someone who'd been thrust into the presidency by tragic circumstances, Arthur's time in office is now recognised for the quiet but important reforms he helped usher in during his brief time in office. His legacy, once overshadowed by his association with the political machine, has come to be appreciated as an important chapter in the evolution of American governance. When Arthur ascended to the presidency in 1881 following the assassination of President Garfield, he was faced with the daunting task of leading a nation in mourning, with political divisions at an all-time high. His appointment as vice president had been seen as a political maneuver to balance factions within the Republican Party, and his initial association with the stalwarts and the patronage system did not inspire confidence in his leadership. However, it was his ability to adapt, his willingness to support necessary reforms, and his steady, calm demeanour that would define his presidency. Arthur's presidency was marked by pragmatism, a commitment to efficiency, and a willingness to break from his past allegiances. He faced significant challenges, from the continued political battles between the stalwarts and half-breeds to the country's need for modernization in both its political and military systems. What stands out most about his presidency is his ability to evolve in response to the needs of the country. His support for the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883 was perhaps his most significant act of leadership, as it marked a departure from the patronage system that had long defined American politics. The Pendleton Act established the principle of merit-based appointments to federal positions, paving the way for the modern civil service system and setting a precedent for future reforms. Though Arthur was initially a product of the political machine, his leadership on civil service reform showed that he was capable of moving beyond his past associations. The decision to embrace reform, even at the risk of alienating his political allies, demonstrated a quiet strength that was characteristic of his leadership style. He showed that political pragmatism could lead to meaningful change, especially in an era when the country was moving away from the corrupt practices of the Gilded Age. In addition to his support for civil service reform, Arthur's contributions to the military modernization of the United States were another important aspect of his presidency. His efforts to strengthen the US Navy, including the construction of modern warships and the establishment of the Naval War College, helped lay the foundation for the country's growing influence on the global stage. The United States was emerging as a world power, and Arthur's foresight in recognizing the need for a modernized military was a key part of that transformation. The Navy would go on to play a central role in the country's military and diplomatic efforts, particularly during the Spanish-American War just over a decade after Arthur's presidency. Despite these accomplishments, Arthur's presidency was not without its challenges and controversies. His support for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which limited Chinese immigration, remains one of the darker aspects of his time in office. The law reflected the racial prejudices of the era and remains a regrettable stain on his legacy. However, it is important to view this decision within the context of the time, when nativism and xenophobia were rampant in American society. While Arthur's signing of the Chinese Exclusion Act was politically motivated, it also highlights the complex and sometimes contradictory nature of his presidency. Arthur's legacy has evolved in the years since his death in 1886. Initially dismissed as a product of the political machine, he is now appreciated for his significant contributions to American government and for his ability to adapt to the changing political landscape. His presidency was not one of grand speeches or sweeping reforms, but one of steady progress and quiet competence. His legacy is a testament to the importance of leadership in times of transition and the ability to navigate political complexities in order to achieve lasting change. In the years following his presidency, historians began to recognize the importance of Arthur's role in modernizing the federal government. His support for civil service reform, military expansion, and a more professional government laid the foundation for many of the political and administrative changes that would follow. Though his time in office was short, his presidency was a turning point in American politics, one that marked the beginning of a shift away from the old patronage system toward a more meritocratic approach to governance. Ultimately, Chester A. Arthur's presidency serves as a reminder that sometimes the most effective leadership is not about dramatic change or grandiose plans, but about making steady progress toward a better, more efficient system. His legacy, while not as flashy as those of some of his contemporaries, demonstrates that quiet leadership, pragmatism, and a commitment to reform can leave an enduring mark on a nation. As we reflect on Chester A. Arthur's presidency and his lasting impact on American governance, we see a figure who, despite his initial association with political machines and patronage, ultimately proved to be a leader capable of adapting to the demands of his time. Though he did not leave behind the sweeping dramatic reforms of some of his contemporaries, his presidency was one of significant quiet change that shaped the nation for years to come. Arthur's most significant legacy lies in his support for civil service reform. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, signed into law in 1883, marked a turning point in American politics. The law shifted the country away from the corrupt system of patronage that had long dominated federal appointments and established a merit-based system for hiring government officials. This reform not only made the federal government more professional and efficient, but it also laid the foundation for future civil service reforms. Today, the principles of the Pendleton Act remain a cornerstone of the modern federal bureaucracy, ensuring that public service positions are filled based on merit and qualifications rather than political connections. Arthur's role in the modernization of the US Navy was another key aspect of his presidency. In an era when the United States was beginning to assert itself as a global power, Arthur recognized the need for a strong military presence, particularly at sea. His support for building a modern, steel-hulled navy laid the groundwork for the United States to compete with the naval powers of Europe. The navy that Arthur helped build would play a pivotal role in America's rise to global prominence, particularly during the Spanish-American War a decade later. Although Arthur's presidency was also marked by controversy, particularly with the signing of the Chinese Exclusion Act, it is important to understand these decisions in the context of their time. The law, which banned Chinese immigration, reflected the xenophobic attitudes that were widespread in 19th century America. While this decision remains a blemish on Arthur's record, it is a reflection of the difficult political and social realities of his era. Arthur's leadership style, characterized by calm, pragmatic decision-making, set him apart from many of his contemporaries. He did not seek to be a transformative leader through grand gestures, but rather through steady progress and a commitment to professionalism and reform. His presidency, while brief, demonstrated that effective leadership often involves compromise and incremental change, rather than radical shifts or bold declarations. This approach enabled Arthur to successfully navigate the turbulent political waters of the late 19th century, leaving behind a legacy of gradual yet lasting improvements to American governance. The legacy of Chester A. Arthur is also a reminder that history often remembers those who have the courage to evolve. Arthur, initially seen as a figure associated with the political machines and patronage, made the difficult decision to embrace civil service reform. His willingness to support such a monumental change in the way government appointments were made demonstrated a recognition that the nation needed to move forward from the corrupt practices of the past. His ability to adapt to the evolving political environment of the Gilded Age helped lay the groundwork for future reforms that would shape the American political system for decades to come. In retrospect, Arthur's presidency can be viewed as a crucial bridge between the political machine politics of the 19th century and the emerging reform movements that would come to dominate the early 20th century. Though his time in office was relatively short and often overshadowed by the events surrounding Garfield's assassination, his actions helped steer the country toward a more efficient and professional government. The Pendleton Act, his support for military modernization, and his measured leadership during a time of division and change all contributed to the shaping of modern American government. Today, Chester A. Arthur's legacy is viewed with greater appreciation. Once seen as a transitional figure who merely filled the vacancy left by Garfield's death, he's now recognized as a president who navigated complex political terrain with quiet competence and foresight. His presidency serves as a reminder that leadership is not always defined by grand moments or dramatic shifts, but often by the ability to make steady progress and respond to the needs of the moment. In the final analysis, Arthur's contributions to the United States, though subtle, are significant. His presidency helped lay the foundation for a more modern and efficient federal government, one that would be less susceptible to corruption and more focused on merit and professional competence. His quiet strength in the face of political adversity and his ability to adapt to the changing times left an enduring impact on the country he served. As we conclude our journey through the life and presidency of Chester A. Arthur, it is clear that his time in office, though short, was marked by quiet but important progress. Arthur was a man who faced the challenges of his time with steady resolve, working behind the scenes to modernize the federal government and steer the country through a period of profound change. His legacy, shaped by his support for civil service reform, military modernization, and pragmatic leadership, is one that continues to resonate in the history of the United States. While Arthur may not have sought fame or recognition, his contributions to the nation were significant. His leadership during the transitional period of the Gilded Age laid the foundation for the reforms that would follow. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, his modernization of the U.S. Navy, and his commitment to professionalism in government all played crucial roles in shaping the future of American politics. Arthur's presidency may not have been filled with dramatic moments or sweeping reforms, but it was one of quiet, steady progress. He showed that leadership often comes not in grand gestures, but in the small, often unnoticed decisions that have long-lasting effects. Chester A. Arthur's time in office is a reminder that sometimes the most important leaders are those who can adapt to the changing needs of their country, ensuring that steady improvements are made even in times of political and social upheaval. In the end, Chester A. Arthur's legacy stands as a testament to the power of pragmatic leadership, the importance of reform, and the lasting impact that even the most unassuming presidents can have on the course of a nation. His presidency, though brief, was a crucial chapter in the story of America's growth into a modern global power.